So today we're talking about crime scene investigations, and we're briefly touching on how to collect evidence, although we're going to save that for a more in-depth unit next unit. The goal of any crime scene investigation is to recognize, document, and collect evidence at the scene of a crime. Authorities have to prove first that a crime occurred and that the person who is charged with the crime was actually responsible for the crime. And collecting evidence at a crime scene is what allows us to not only prove the crime has occurred, but also prove we have the right suspect. Your top reasons for committing a crime are money, revenge, and emotion. A lot of times you will see people trying to get money through insurance fraud, or they're trying to get back at somebody with revenge. And a lot of times when it comes to emotion, people are very passionate. Love, hate, and anger are those emotions that drive people to commit crimes. We can find evidence from a body at the crime scene as well as suspects. We can also get evidence from a primary crime scene, that's where the crime occurred, and or a secondary crime scene. For instance, if a person robs a bank, we would consider that bank the primary crime scene, and we would consider the suspect's home, where we go to search for clues. Maybe we want to search their computer. That would be the secondary crime scene. It's not where the crime occurred, but it is associated with the crime. Locard's principle, once again, we are talking about Locard, and his principle is every contact leaves a trace. So when a person comes in contact with an object or another person, material is transferred. The more intense the interaction, the greater the exchange of material. So if there's a struggle, you're going to expect that both the victim and the suspect are going to walk away with exchanges of material, whether it be threads or hair or anything, just depending upon what the interaction and how intense that was. When we have transferred material, we consider that trace evidence. Trace evidence can be hair, it can be latent prints such as lip prints, which are very unique, fingerprints, blood. Pollen is a great example of trace evidence. It can link a person to a particular field, wherever that pollen of that plant happens to grow. Gunshot residue, not sure what that is. Broken glass, soil analysis, threads, and tire tread as all examples of trace evidence. So whenever you have a contact, there's going to be exchange of material. Direct evidence is firsthand observations. This includes eyewitness accounts, video, if you have surveillance of the person committing the crime. Those are very good pieces of evidence because they are firsthand accounts of somebody committing a crime. We will be dealing mostly with circumstantial evidence. This is indirect physical or biological evidence that links a person to a crime, but it doesn't necessarily prove guilt. There are physical examples, bullets, which we can link bullets to guns, and if you're in possession of a gun that's linked to a bullet found at a crime scene, that links you to the bullet. It doesn't necessarily mean you committed the crime, but it provides a connection to the crime scene. Weapons, fibers, tool marks are all examples of physical circumstantial evidence. Biological examples are anything associated with living organisms. So it could be bodily fluids, hair, plant parts. Those are all considered biological examples of circumstantial evidence. Your crime scene investigation team includes police officers, crime scene investigators, and that's what our focus is going to be. We're going to learn the roles of recorders, sketch artists, photographers, as well as evidence collectors. If there's a body at the scene, we'd also include the medical examiner's office or the coroner's office, detectives, and depending upon what type of scene we have, we may include one or more specialists. So for instance, if we have a body and there are insects on the body, we would include a forensic entomologist. So we kind of wait and see what the scene has, and then we determine who's needed at the scene. All right, in a crime scene investigation, we are basing this on the scientific method. What's important to remember is that in every other science, we collect a bunch of data and we collect a bunch of evidence, and then we draw conclusions from that evidence and from that data. In forensic science, we are given the outcome. We are given the crime scene, the end result. And it is our job as forensic scientists to collect evidence and to collect as much information as we can to create a hypothesis about what happened right before the crime, during the crime, and after the crime. It's based on the Locard exchange principle logic as well as forensic techniques. We use very important and precise sets of steps, and our ultimate goal is to find physical evidence. The 7 S's of crime scene investigation include first, securing the scene. This is the responsibility of the first responder. You need to make sure that you are protecting the crime scene and keeping all of the evidence intact and undamaged and uncontaminated. You will, as a first responder, start a log of all people who are entering, and you can send for additional experts or officers. Every crime scene is different. It really depends on what the needs of your particular crime scene are. The second S of investigating crime scenes is to separate and question the witnesses. It's important to get your witnesses separated so that they don't start to discuss. That can really change what the reality of the scene was, as we know that eyewitness testimony is not always the most reliable. Questions that you would ask your witnesses: when did the crime occur? Who called it in? Who's the victim? Can the perpetrator be identified? What did you see happen? And where were you when you observed the crime scene? And it's really important to catch your witnesses right away, as the longer the time passes, the less likely they are to remember details. And sometimes the brain can fill in some of the parts that it doesn't know, and it really alters the reality of what actually happened and what was actually seen by the witness. Your third S is to scan the scene. This is a determination of where photos should be taken, and you need to also determine if this location is a primary crime scene where the crime actually occurred, or a secondary location such as where a body was moved to. Your fourth S is to see the scene. This is also recording the scene. You're going to take photos. You would include close-up pictures both with and without a scale or a ruler. And you digitize the scene if possible. So nowadays we don't use a lot of print film. This is not really an issue, but you do want to make sure that you're using digital copies of your photographs. Fifth S is to sketch the scene. We draw these to scale, and you do have to measure each object from two immovable objects. So the reason that we sketch the scene, even though we've already photographed the scene, is to make sure that we know exact locations of pieces of evidence in relation to two immovable objects. Walls or grates. Dressers would not be a great object because that can be moved, and that changes, and that would change what the position of your piece of evidence is. When you get to court, it's really important that you have a good sketch of what the crime scene looked like and where all the evidence was collected from, as well as the distances and heights of those pieces of evidence. That becomes a very important document to help everyone reconstruct the crime scene and to see what was happening even though they weren't there. Always include the direction of north on your sketch, and make sure that there's a scale of the drawing. One box on the grid equals 1 foot, or whatever your scale is determined to be. The date and location should also be included. Here's a great example of a sketch. The one thing I wish was different is this is in fact not drawn to scale, but we have the address, the date, the case number, who made this sketch, and you can see that there is a nice picture, a bird's eye view of the crime scene, and we have a legend that shows us evidence that was on the floor, our octagon. So here we have evidence on the floor. elevated horizontal evidence, like on the dresser, so it's laying flat on top of something. And we also have vertical evidence, so it's up against the wall. Right here we see there's vertical evidence on the door, so maybe blood spatter or something of that nature was on the door. And again, great sketches include which way is north. Your sixth S is to search for evidence. We use tools such as flashlights, UV lights. Sometimes, not all the time, you'll use a vacuum to collect trace evidence. Vacuums are not ideal because they collect a lot of extra evidence as well. Investigators walk patterns to avoid missing anything. It has to be systematic and immediate. It's important that it's systematic because you don't want to overlook anything. You don't want to miss a piece of evidence because you're looking here and there and then everywhere. And it has to be immediate to protect the evidence. You want to make sure that evidence like a tire impression in mud, if it were to rain again, you lose that piece of evidence. So you have to make sure that you're collecting right away. The investigator in charge is responsible for the collection of evidence. What to search for is determined by the circumstances of the crime. For instance, if you have a stabbing, you're not going to look for a gun. You will be looking for a knife in terms of evidence. And how to search depends on the size, the location of your crime scene, and how many searchers you have. Let's talk a little bit about our different crime scene search patterns. We have the zone, the spiral, the line, and the grid. The line or strip method is best if you have a very large outdoor scene. It's also best if you have a lot of people. Here we can see everyone is lined up in a line and they're going to walk in one direction through the scene. And if they see evidence, they're going to put a evidence marker next to that and continue walking. A grid method is basically a double line search. So you go one direction first and then you go perpendicular to those original lines. It is incredibly effective. You're not going to miss anything doing a grid search, but it's very time consuming. And again, you do have to have a lot of people. And if you have objects in the way, this is not the appropriate search pattern to use because then you wind up going in a squiggly line around those objects. Zone search patterns are most effective in houses or buildings because usually we have furniture and other items that are in the way that prevents us from walking in those straight lines. What we'd do is we would separate, this room is the crime zone, and we'd separate it into 1, 2, 3, 4 different smaller zones, and we would assign a person to each zone to look for evidence. A spiral is not a bad search method, but it's tough to find a place where it would be most appropriate. You can move inward, so you start in a big circle and you spiral inwards, or you can move outwards. You cannot have any physical barriers with the spiral. And the other, the time that this would be appropriate is perhaps in a field, outdoors, and when you don't have very many searchers or investigators to look for evidence. If you have enough people, you want to do a line or a strip method. The seventh S is securing and collecting evidence. Liquids and arsons have to be stored in airtight, unbreakable containers. And biological evidence we do the exact opposite with. That has to be placed into a breathable container. It must dry out before you package it in plastic. And the reason for that is that biological evidence, when wet, is prone to mold and rot. And you do not want to destroy any potential cell evidence or DNA evidence that might be on that biological evidence. So what's important here is to know what type of evidence you have and make sure that you're securing it properly. Once that biological evidence is dried, it gets transferred to a paper bindle, which is like taking a flat piece of paper and folding it in on every edge so that your evidence doesn't move around the paper bag. It stays in one place. Evidence logs are completed. We do the case number, which is the date, year, and case number. So here we see December 1st, 2014 is 12 is for December, 01 is the day, 14 is the year, and this is the first case of the day, so we give it the 01 case number. If we were to do an item inventory number, we do the exact same thing. So here we have the same case number as before, first case of the day on December 1st, 2014, except for now we put whichever piece of evidence has the first evidence marker on it, that is considered evidence number 1. Evidence number 2 gets an O2. So just depending upon how the evidence is marked when you're on scene will give you your item inventory number for that piece of evidence. We write a description of the evidence, a name of the suspect if we know who the suspect is, the name of the victim if we know who the victim is at that time, date and time of recovery, as well as a signature of the person recovering the evidence. And it's also important too to get the signature of a witness to you collecting the evidence. So here's an example of a chain of custody form, which is also filled out, and that just makes sure that the evidence can be accounted for at all times, so it's always in somebody's possession. Some legal considerations when searching crime scenes. We have to consider the Fourth Amendment. So any removal and searching of people or homes or effects has to be done according to the Constitution. So the Fourth Amendment states the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. So you can't just go and search somebody's house and take whatever you want, cannot be violated, and no warrant shall be issued. So you're not allowed to do that unless you have probable cause. So you have a pretty good reason to think that this person was involved in a particular crime. Supported by oath or affirmation means you need a judge to sign off on your warrants, and particularly describing the place to be searched. So in your warrant, you have to state where you're going to search, and you also have to search, or you have to state who you're going to search and what you're planning on seizing. So you can't just go and say, I just want to have a look around. That's not good enough. You have to say, I'm pretty sure we're going to find this gun because I have probable cause to believe that this person was, in fact, part of this crime and shot the victim, and so we're going to find this gun at the suspect's house. There are some times when it is appropriate to do a warrantless search. If you have an emergency circumstance, that would be an appropriate time. If you need to prevent immediate loss or destruction of evidence, say there's a fire, you got to get in, get evidence, you don't need a warrant for that. If you're in the middle of an arrest and you search the person to remove everything from their pockets before you put them in the car, anything you find in their pockets can be seized if it's illegal. If the search is made by consent of the involved party, so if you say, can I search your house? And they say, yes, you can, and then you find something, that is a warrantless search. Plain view doctrine is if they give you consent to look around the house and you happen to find something illegal, that can be seized as well because it is in plain view. You can't go looking through their drawers for anything, but if it's out in plain view, then it's considered okay to seize in a warrantless search. And other circumstances that are defined by the Supreme Court would be appropriate as well. Have a body involved, you will get the medical examiner involved. If you have a medical examiner system, this is a doctor, usually a pathologist who is appointed by a governing body of the area. Coroner systems are a little different, and that's where you have an elected official who usually has no special medical training. There are only 4 states who have the coroner system where they have in place in the law that the coroner has to be a medical doctor. So this is a figurehead in an elected position. However, in most big cities, your coroner does wind up being a medical doctor. The responsibilities of medical examiners include identification of the deceased, establishing the date of death, determining a medical cause of death. This is the injury or disease that resulted in the person dying. For instance, if somebody has coronary artery disease, their cause of death is coronary artery disease. The mechanism of death is the reason, the physiological reason why they died. So if you have coronary artery disease, you could have a blockage of your arteries causing a heart attack, causing blood not to flow, causing your heart to stop. So the mechanism there would be blockage of arteries due to coronary artery disease, which is your cause of death. The manner of death is classified as either natural, accidental, suicide, homicide, or undetermined. And in the example we've been giving, coronary artery disease would be considered a natural death. The final role of the medical examiner is to notify the next of kin. After a crime scene investigation, the real science work begins. It's our job as a forensic scientist to find test results from the evidence, use those test results to give us a crime scene reconstruction. Test results can be used to identify staged crime scenes. You would see a staged crime scene when somebody's trying to cover up something or the evidence just doesn't match what the crime scene is. For instance, if somebody is trying to collect on insurance money, they could stage a burglary, and when things just don't add up, the evidence doesn't match the outcome, typically you're talking about a staged crime.